started. How you doing, Kamau?
That's a complicated.
Is that loaded of a question, bruh?
I mean, it's mostly like if this is therapy, we can talk about it for an hour. But since it's this, there's a lot. There's a lot that I knew this would be once it released into the world. That I'm hearing from a lot of people. I'm not responding to most of it. And I'm going through it the way that I thought I might go through it. Last night to go to bed going, Bill Cosby's people are going to release a statement about you tomorrow morning. It was like, it's not the easiest night of sleep I ever had, but I'm on the other side of it now.
Oh no, I'm scared of that. I don't even know.
It ended up being very much. They called me a PR hack, which of all the things they could have called me, that's probably the one I'm least worried about.
Oh Lord, that's a lot going on. But I just want to say this before we get started. I am a great admirer of yours, of your tenacity, of your work ethic. And I've been following you for a long time. And I'm like, anybody that can get down and go toe to toe with the KKK is all right with me. So
do what I can.
Listen, I'm not mad at you. So let's talk about Bill Cosby. When this is what I loved about what you did with this. It could have been approached from so many different vantage points, and you approached it, in my opinion, in the very right way. And honestly, I don't think anybody else would have been able to do this particular project justice but you. And this is why. You reminded people of why his legacy made it so hard for Black people to go, oh no, not the Jello pudding man, not the Cos, not Dr. Huxtable. Like, you reminded people of his legacy. And I just want to find out what made you go that vantage point as to going right into the heart of the matter.
I mean, so for me, before this ever was an idea that I could direct a project like this, when the allegations all came out after Hannibal Buress's joke, and then Barbara Bowman wrote the op-ed for the Washington Post, I read this story about a documentary about the history of Black stuntmen in Hollywood, and how Bill Cosby was the person, not among the people, was the person who stood up to integrate the stunt industry for Black performers, because he refused to let a white man get painted black to do his stunt on I Spy. So this is his first job in Hollywood, and he stood up. And Noni Robinson, whose story we tell in the doc, was the filmmaker. And I remember thinking, and she had to pull an interview she did with him out of the doc, and then I never saw the doc come out. And I remember thinking, if we lose that, we're losing history. We're not just losing it's not about whether or not Bill Cosby was funny, because that people can debate that all day long. Right. We're actually losing a part of the history of Black people in this country if we can't tell Bill Cosby's contribution to that. And then I thought, and then sort of along all these lines, I saw Ezra Edelman's O.J. Simpson Made in America, and was like, we all were probably in the same position of when somebody's like, do you want to watch a 7.5-hour doc about O.J. Simpson? You're like, no, why would I want to watch that? But then you watch that doc, and 5 minutes in, you're like, oh. And then 20 minutes in, you're like, man, O.J. was good at football. And you're like, wait, why am I thinking that? And to me, that was the model for this, along with Dream Hampton's Surviving R. Kelly, about how you approach this kind of material.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I loved that you did that, because there's a whole generation of people that didn't grow up on the Cosby Show. They don't know that he did Jello pudding commercials. They didn't know that he was on I Spy. There's a whole generation of people that don't know anything about that. So I was so excited that you did that. And you taught me stuff that I didn't know. First of all, let's just talk about the Spanish fly situation. I did not know that he had a book where he mentioned it 25 times.
Yes.
I did not know. And I'm gonna tell you, going into it, I had a certain ideology going into it, as everyone will that watches this. And now my ideology has shifted because of what you put into a cinematic landscape. So I'm just like, I couldn't believe that there were, as you said in the doc, that there have been breadcrumbs that were left all along the way. And why did no one pay attention to this? And I just want to get your opinion about the fact that in Hollywood in particular, regardless of what color the man is, there's that old boys network of boys will be boys. And so people just didn't pay attention. That's how we ended up with a Me Too movement. You know what I mean?
That part, yes. Yes.
So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that for a second.
Well, yeah. So I think in Hollywood, if you're number one on the call sheet, it doesn't matter what race you are, you're the most powerful person in the production. You know, even more powerful than the producers sometimes, if you are also a producer, the way Bill Cosby was. So,
Right.
and that being number one on the call sheet comes with a level of privilege and access. Like, you know, and I'm number one on the call sheet on United Shades. So if I say, get me a two-shot mocha from Starbucks with no whipped cream, you better damn well get me a two-shot mocha from Starbucks with no whipped cream. And if a PA says it, a production assistant who's only working for 3 days says, get me a two-shot mocha, who are you? You know what I mean? And so that's just a hint at the level of power and that you have when you're number one on the call sheet. And as we know through the history of Hollywood, through the history of the Me Too movement, it ain't just Bill Cosby who took advantage of that power and used it for misdeeds and worse. So
Exactly.
for me, it's about there is something endemically wrong in Hollywood that if somebody is doing something you don't trust, that you are trained and acculturated to look the other way. If you're not number one on the call, if you're below the line, as they say, and it means that in Hollywood we are prioritizing profit over safety, profit over a supportive workspace, profit over justice, and that's been, you know, I always joke that like when they first built Hollywood, they didn't say before we start creating dreams out of nothing, where should we put the human resources department? That wasn't a conversation. And
No.
so along with that means that even if you see something you don't know and you want to tell somebody, you're likely to know that if you tell somebody, you're going to get fired, not the
Exactly.
person you're telling on.
That part right there. That part right there.
That part, yeah.
That part. You also seem to be very strategic in the people that you did the live interviews with. They range from, you know, Godfrey being a warm-up stand-up on the Cosby Show, to journalists, to educators, to actual survivors of the crimes that Cosby had been accused of. What made you mix it up like that? Because it could have very easily been one of these documentaries where it was only the survivor women talking. And I love how you skipped around the timeline of that and zeroed in on specific people.
So I mean, some of this is about who said yes and who said no when we asked them. Like if you, so just to be quite honest, if you stack the yeses next to the no's are way taller than the yeses. Some of it is people I know personally, like Mark Lamont Hill knows I know ain't afraid of saying nothing to nobody about whatever he believes. And also I knew as a Temple professor he'd had a connection to Cosby, of somewhat of a connection. And then some people like Kierna Mayo really has done enough already in this issue. In this, she was the ex editor in chief of Ebony magazine, and just that cover that she was a part of creating, the Huxtable family with the broken glass over it. She could say, "I've already done my part," but she really trusted me to help tell this story in a new way. And then there's people like, you know, that you just go, I don't know what Spanish fly is, but I bet there's somebody out there who can explain it to me. And then we find this drug expert, Hamilton Morris. And then we also talk about like, the thing I appreciated about Surviving R. Kelly was the therapists and psychologists who were in it to help explain how a predator preys on people. And that's when we got Sonali Rashitoir and Dr. Barbara Ziv, who also worked in the trial, in the prosecution of Bill Cosby. So there's just, I always think the best conversations can bribe the smartest, hippest, most with it people. And so it's about like just even some of those people I know, luckily, and some of these people I could reach out to and would say yes.
Well, I think you got the right ingredients to make a nice little baked cake with the people that you were able to get to say yes to do it, because the knowledge that they dropped in their respective fields and their perspective in regards to this subject was immeasurable. So thank you for
Thank you.
that.
And I
Oh,
thank them for that because couldn't have done it without them.
absolutely. So I'm not sure if you said this or who said this, but toward the end of the doc, someone says the ending is like a torn page.
I think that's Godfrey, which I thought was like, you know, he's a hilarious dude, but that's some deep haiku level quotable famous black quote shit. Like it was really like that really, yeah, I think it was Godfrey.
Exactly. And in that moment, I did what Jamel said, is that I did the black girl sigh.
Deep black. Yep.
You know what I mean? I was like, oh, it is like a torn page, because you shed a light bulb on some things that I had never heard about Bill Cosby that I never even knew. And not for nothing, but the one person that I actually really, without a shadow of a doubt, believed was Patricia. Because as someone who is a survivor of being violated in that way, this is what I know for sure. You either don't remember any details at all, or you remember it very, very vividly. And she remembered it very, very vividly, and communicated it in a way where you were like, oh, this doll is telling the truth.
Yeah, like where would you get all those details from? Why would you make up all those? Like, to me, it's just like knowing that, like, yes, there are some lawsuits, but most of these people are not filing lawsuits. They just want to tell their stories and try to create a safer world for future victims of sexual assault and rape.
Exactly. And I felt like particularly with the stories of the survivors, it got to a point where it was the details became the same at a certain point. The details became the same, and it kind of made you go like this. It was like, okay, this is that one eye open moment. But as a Black man in America who also did stand up, who also was doing comedy, who also is a very prolific voice in the landscape of television and in this new digital age of social media that we have, what did it mean for you to bring this story to the forefront right now? Like, why this story right now?
I mean, not to make too much of it, but it very much felt like I'm putting my career and reputation on the line. And I know that there are people who consider themselves to be fans of mine, especially Black folks, that once they see this, they're going to be like, I'm out. That this may be too much for them, whether or not they believe the women or not, but they just sort of feel like, the narrative of Black man tearing down a Black man. And if you watch the doc, I don't think that's what's happening. It's a Black man trying to reckon with all he understands and believes about this famous Black man, this man who was his hero. But I think that I always knew that the people who would hate this doc the most are the ones who were never going to watch it. They're just going to see the trailer or see the press release and just hate it from there. And a part of me was like, this could be the end of my career. This could be, because even if you believe these women and you believe you believe that Bill Cosby raped these women, you may feel like I'm toxic now because a lot of people won't want to mess with me. So, and I just sort of understand, but I also knew after I'd had every talk I had with the survivor for the purpose of the production, I just was more committed to I can't turn my back on them. I can't just sort of quit this and go creative differences or get my lawyer to get me out of it, because then I would be leaving these stories just on the shelf somewhere, which would not be fair to these women who trusted me specifically because they knew of my work with United Shades and felt like I could tell this story. And they trusted me to put them in a doc that we told them was going to have positive things about Bill Cosby's career in it, which most of them don't want to sit through that stuff. But they understood that we were like trying to reach a bigger audience than maybe a doc like this normally reaches.
Yeah, we live in a culture where people just want to gossip about all the bad stuff and not necessarily look at the good stuff that got you to the bad stuff, which brings me to this last thing I want to discuss with you. There wasn't a whole lot of attention paid to, and rightfully so, the murder of his son Ennis. I feel like in watching the documentary that there seemed to be a seismic shift with him personality-wise the minute that happened.
I mean, there are other people who speculated on that being this moment where he sort of like lost some faith and some hope. All I can do is look at the timeline of like his son dies 7 years later, and also the pound cake speech in 2004 was just a thing he was starting to do. It just sort of blew up in 2004. Something shifts with him. Could be broken heart, could be all the toxicity of all these assaults inside of him. Who knows what it is? But something shifted, and also I wanted to pay respect to the fact that like I can't imagine what that's like to have your son murdered that way. It has to affect you somehow. And the bite that really helped us to keep that in was the fact that Patricia, as you said in that moment, goes, I had empathy for him even after what had happened between me and him. And that's a powerful statement, that she still had empathy for him despite what he had done to her. And she hoped that it would bring him, we say the come to Jesus moment. She would hope that it would somehow, and at that point, she thought she was the only one. she didn't even know there was all these other people. But yeah, she had
Yeah,
hoped for
she
some sort of
said, I remember her saying that in the doc, that at that point she thought she was the only one, and then all
yeah,
these other women came out with their stories.
yeah.
Just to close it out, Kamau, I'm so excited to talk to you. I wish I could talk to you, man, for like a whole hour. There's so
Oh,
many
we
other
can talk
things.
again. We can once all this comes out, you can just reach out to me and we can talk more. I'm happy to talk to you
Yeah,
some more.
because there's so many other things I want to talk to you about. But in regards to this particular project, what has it meant for you to, have that platform that you have with United Shades, and now have your directorial debut at the Sundance Film Festival?
None of this is what the kid who was watching Eddie Murphy on Saturday Night Live and Bill Cosby himself thought his showbiz career would be. When I sat there envisioning one day I'm going to be a stand-up comedian, and if you'd asked me what I was going to do, I'd have been like, well, eventually they'll make another sequel from Beverly Hills Cop, and I'll be Eddie Murphy's son in Beverly Hills Cop, and eventually I'll have my own sitcom that's like the Cosby Show, and eventually I'll have to write a book because they always make you write a book, and the only thing I've done with that is write the book. Like the rest of it is not. So I thought I would be, a comedian. Really, if I'm honest, I thought I'd be Kevin Hart before I even understood what that meant to be Kevin Hart. But somewhere along the way, I learned that I'm not good at that. That's not my role. That's not my job. And I feel very lucky and blessed that I came up at a time in show business where a comedian could have a TV show on CNN, because that was not a thing that existed when I was a kid. So, and that somehow the work I did at CNN made people believe that I could do something this ambitious. So, once we got into Sundance, I just sort of felt like for the whole team, this was hard to make, and it was emotional to make, and there was times where all of us probably wanted to quit. That was just a recognition that your effort is being recognized. And so even though we didn't actually get to go to Sundance in real life, that was to me like a big feather in my cap that I will never forget.
Well, the big feather in my cap that I'll never forget was the opportunity to sit down and talk to you. This is like a bucket list moment for me.
Oh my goodness.
I've
Oh my
wanted to do
goodness.
this for a really long time. When I say I admire you and I respect your work, I really mean that from the top of my head down to the tips of my toes, seriously. And I'm so happy that you made time to talk to me about it. And I'm looking
Yes.
forward to people seeing the doc, and like you said, some people are going to embrace it and some people won't, but we can't worry about that. You got a project out there that you felt strongly and passionate about. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters, is that you got a dream of yours fulfilled through somebody that was your hero. And it's unfortunate that it has to be in this light, but it happened just the way it needed to happen.
And I just want to be clear about this. I don't see myself only making this type of work as I go forward. My first documentary was an hour-long documentary about Chris Rock and his special Bring the Pain. I also see myself as a person who wants to highlight Black stories that aren't this dark and painful. So, I just want people to know that I'm not in the, we need to talk about this problematic Black person. That's not my genre, but there are more stories to tell. And I'm just trying to tell more unheard stories.
I appreciate you, W. Kamau Bell, and I appreciate you for making that statement. Yeah. So until the next time, brother, peace.
Oh, there will be a next time. Make sure we'll stay in touch.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.